Well, good evening, YouTube, and anyone else listening to this. I'm going to try an audio version of this broadcast to see how much more comfortable I feel doing it, because then I can fidget and rock and do other things that really do annoy people when I do it on camera. So let's see what we can do with a audio version of the broadcast, and tell me if you like it or you don't. If you go back, I'll go back to the video. If people don't like it, or if they do, then I'll keep doing it like this, which is feels more comfortable to me anyway. So, anyway, tonight I have a couple things I want to talk about. Let's just dive right in. So, I'm voting for a Democrat this November. Just something to get that out there right now. And there's a couple of dozen reasons for it, but to break it down, after doing an inventory of my personal views on various issues, I find I align myself a lot more with liberals than conservatives. And that's not to say that I'm toting the liberal line exclusively. There are plenty of ideas that are based in conservatism that I do very much agree with, but they're somewhat few and far between. But there are a few, and so I'm looking to possibly, at best I would probably be called a moderate still, but moderate leaning left, as opposed to moderate leaning right, which is usually what I used to view myself as. Now you may ask, well, how did you come to this realization? Well, a whole bunch of reading I've been doing the last month or so, or and not just the month, but the last 6 months, I would say. It started with me seeing this amazing book for sale, written by Paul Krugman. He's a Nobel laureate in economics, and his specialty is specifically depression economics, which are different from everyday economics, like we saw, during the good old times where employment was plentiful, money was available, and jobs were just there, unlike right now. So, as I started reading his work, I started noticing that a lot of what he said made a lot more sense now that I've heard it in that context. Because before, I always just heard things in this kind of, all things being equal context, where you're just assuming things are equal, and then suddenly all these assertions about economics work. So, let's start with that. So, Krugman contends that we're in a depression, but not like the Great Depression, like the one we saw in the that was started in 1929. But when looking at the conditions leading up to the collapse, they were very similar. In that the crash of 1929 was actually caused by a combination of reckless borrowing / lending and a severe shock to the stock market, which caused prices to tumble, lenders to call their loans in, and borrowers to basically and literally lose their shirts. Led to an extremely hard time in our economy, where we were facing 28% unemployment, literal starvation of entire regions because there was literally no money to be had. So I would say that conditions are pretty close to the way they were now, except that we have the social safety net in place to keep people from going into free fall. Now, you're probably going, "Oh my God, Gabe, you must be absolutely out of your freaking mind. I mean, why would you argue in favor of economic policy that destroyed the country?" It's like, but that's just it. It didn't destroy the country. The country was destroyed by people acting greedy and reckless, and when their bets were called in, they didn't have the money to pay them, which caused the banking system to go into free fall and taxpayers to bail it out. So, on that note, I'm not willing to entertain people saying let the free market manage itself, when the free market is essentially like a 14-year-old being told to basically manage yourself and stop getting into trouble, because it doesn't seem to be learning how to do that. So at the moment, unless someone can show me some other argument, I'm not going to entertain that argument anymore, because it's just not a valid one. It doesn't hold up to scrutiny and numbers and logic anymore. Not to me, anyway. So, on that note, let's dive right into the other reason. The reason I am voting for a Democrat in the White House this November is because I'm pro-choice, pro-gay marriage, pro-regulation on business and labor, There are other issues I want to bring up besides that. I do agree with establishing a consumer protection bureau. It's a good bit of policy. It's not going to drive costs up, and quite frankly, I think it's going to hold more people accountable to being honest business people versus being douchebags with contracts. Which if you've ever read a credit card agreement, it's like reading a second language because it's all in legalese. Unless you're reading a Capital One credit card agreement, then actually they do their best to put it in plain English for you, which is actually quite nice, and it's a compliment to the company for being proactive on that. So I give dibs to Capital One for that. Other issues that I want to talk about tonight, we're going to talk a little bit about the minimum wage and the minimum wage tip credit. And why it's so unethical, in my opinion. Another one is I want to talk about a little bit more about Medicare and the proposed reforms to Medicare and why they won't work. And finally, I want to talk about there's one more topic I was going to talk about, but I can't remember what it is at the moment, so we're just going to move straight into it. So stay tuned, and after the break, we're going to come back. Alright everyone, welcome back. So, let's just jump right into it again. This segment I want to talk about the minimum wage, and the reason I'm starting with this one is because the minimum wage is something that I care a great deal about. Now, we've all heard the arguments that the minimum wage causes unemployment. This is not true, in that it only causes unemployment if there is an equal amount of wage earners to jobs, basically. So, if you have an equal amount of wages to jobs, then yes, it will cause unemployment. However, because there is a surplus of labor and a shortage of jobs, the minimum wage will not hurt unemployment because the unemployment's already high. It can't hurt it any more than it already has. Then other conditions have already hurt it. So, the minimum wage right now nationally is $7.25 an hour. It was increased during the Bush administration, where it was increased from $5.15 to $7.25 over a 2-year period, or 3-year period, I think it was, one of the two. And the reason that it's important to talk about the minimum wage is because the purpose of the minimum wage is to ensure a minimum standard of living for the people in our economy that work in an unskilled job. Now, I am a firm believer that people have the responsibility to better themselves and to make themselves more marketable as a participant in the labor market. And this is from job training or working hard or being innovative or being a businessman. However, that is created. But also, what needs to be addressed is that the minimum wage cannot be used in politics to try and manipulate or confuse the issues that face the working poor. And those issues are things like access to health care, the ability to live in a world that is seeing ever-increasing costs of living and wages not keeping up with that cost. So it's very, very important that we keep the minimum wage in mind when we talk about these issues. Now, some people will argue, well, the minimum wage it raises prices. Like, true, you do need to pay those wages, so you do see a minor increase in prices when you increase costs. However, that minimum wage has not been raised to such a degree that the costs are unbearable or are causing major disruptions in the supply side of the market. Looking back on the supply side of the market today, say from 10 years ago, I can easily see that the minimum wage has not driven prices up in any large amount. And I live in Washington State, where we have the highest minimum wage in the country, short of San Francisco, where it's like almost $12 an hour. But here, even at our astounding $9.04 an hour, which I used to think was borderline outrageous, it's important to realize that the minimum wage is used to maintain a standard of living so people can survive. And it's not right of a business owner, I don't care what your tier is, to pay a wage that is so low that you literally have a situation where someone cannot survive, even working full time, working 160 hours a month, which would be about what full-time is. And so for the minimum wage, we need to remember that we're trying to make sure people don't end up on the street even though they're working, because it's extremely difficult to get out of homelessness once you're in it. It is an uphill climb out of the pit. And if you don't believe me, you can ask a friend of mine who is actually homeless right now, and he is in that uphill climb as we speak. So, again, it's important that we understand the minimum wage is designed to keep people out of the street and out of poverty to severe poverty like we see with the homeless. So, what is the minimum wage? The minimum wage is basically designed to maintain a standard of living, but it's also designed to ensure that people have enough to meet their basic needs. And those basic needs are things like shelter, food, clothing, and transportation to get around. Those 4 needs must be met to ensure that people do not become disruptions to society. Now, what I mean by that is when economic times are really hard, this is when you begin to see civil unrest. An increase in the crime rate, an increase in especially dangerous crimes, things like murder and rape and robbery all shoot way up. And if you don't believe that, you should look at Seattle's violent crimes rate, which has increased substantially over the last even 2 years. It's really bad. What Seattle is going through right now, and Tacoma as well. So, with that in mind, it is important that as a job-driven society, meaning we put everything in jobs. Jobs are our lifeblood. If we don't have a job, we don't have anything, because the social safety net is not equipped to provide those needs for us in these kinds of catastrophes. So the minimum wage is essential to make sure that people are not left out on the street, that children literally are not starving, and that those that are working for minimum wage have a means of at least providing for basic needs. Now, on this note, I also want to discuss one more aspect of the minimum wage that we do not see in Washington at all, and that is the minimum wage tip credit. Now, many in Washington do not know what this is, so I'll explain what this is. The minimum wage tip credit is a provision in the minimum wage law that gives employers the right to not pay the full minimum wage if their employees are paid tips. Now, why would I be opposed to that? I mean, what if they make $100 a night in tips? And they're making way more money and they don't need the minimum wage. Wrong. Because on the flip side, the minimum wage is also what the employer pays as part of sharing his profits with his employees. I find it morally bankrupt to pay someone $2.16 an hour, which is what the minimum wage tip credit is requiring for. You have to pay a cash wage of 40% of the minimum wage. And before the increase, it was $2.16. I believe it's about the same or pretty close, maybe a little bit higher. But the point is that as the richest nation on God's green earth, there is no reason, no excuse, no justification in any sense of the imagination that we should be paying workers $2.16 or 50 or 75 cents an hour for work that is really difficult to deal with. I've done this. I did not like what I got for a paycheck working in the service industry, especially being male. And yeah, I'm calling reverse sexism right now because I worked in a restaurant. And please excuse my blunt language, I did not have a body. I did not have tits. I was not female. I made shit for tips. And please forgive my language, but I'm going to be just outright blunt about it. Men who do not have either a very sexy body or a sexy appeal to them do not make good tips. I made $30 a night working, let's say, 6 hours, while my female counterparts were making more like 70 to 90. And this is at a Pizza Hut, mind you. This isn't even at a good, like a high-end restaurant. This is at a Pizza Hut. So I'm making $30 a night in tips, while my female counterparts are making 70 to 90. And as far as I am aware, I was not doing anything bad or terrible to deserve such dismal tips. So, again, minimum wage tip credit is literally robbery from your employees. You are forcing your wage obligation onto your onto your customers. They are directly paying for the services that your business is offering, and then you're on top of that, you're putting the wage obligation on top of them as well. And usually the customers will do it because they do not want to see someone making $2 and 15, 16 cents an hour or whatever they make. So, again, there is no reasonable purpose for this minimum wage tip credit. It needs to go away. It is an archaic law. It is not in the best interest of any worker that I can ever see. And this concept that, well, she'll be encouraged to do better work. I would think that the continued employment at the business would be motivation to do good work, not just the tips. I mean, tips are great. Don't get me wrong. I love tips. But I also, most employees require a consistent, regular wage that represents their cut of the profits the business makes, and that minimum wage is offensive to me. I'm sorry. That is offensive. To pay $2.16 to an employee for doing work that is difficult, tedious, and even long sometimes. So, anyway, don't want to go railing on this. I could talk about this all night. But the point is that people, we need some economic justice and some reasonable laws that protect workers from being paid dismally low wages that are literally unsustainable for the middle class and for the working poor. Steadily, the wages of the middle class and of the poor are diminishing year by year as the inflation rate is outpacing the growth in wages. The growth in wages, 1% a year. The growth of inflation, 1.4 to 2% a year. So, again, we cannot continue to let businesses pay wages like this when they obviously should be paying a lot higher wages, and we should be rebuilding the middle class, because the middle class right now is in serious trouble of becoming extinct. The disparity of wealth is causing the middle class to fall behind in wages, to fall behind in quality of life, to fall behind in everything. And in only a few short years, that they will become the working poor will become impoverished, and the impoverished will become homeless. It's just a downhill, it just goes downhill steadily just like that. Back in a minute. Alright, welcome back, people. So, this segment, I just want to talk a little bit about what does it mean for me to call myself a Democrat versus a Republican. Well, that's a complicated question. I tend to favor overall being fair and reasonable with people, and so on that note, I want to approach this question from a fair and reasonable point of view. So, let's start with the positions that Democrats take versus Republicans and why I don't favor them. So, abortion, I won't go into too much about because I've done it so much already. It's a dead horse, basically. But suffice to say, I don't think that people outside of the woman have the right to tell her whether or not she can end her pregnancy or not. I mean, the decision is probably hard enough without someone breathing down your neck about it, or a government telling you have to do it a certain way. So, on that note, a woman has a right to determine what goes on with her body, and if the law forces her to keep a pregnancy, then you are essentially enslaving her in her own body. You're oppressing her in her own body. And while you may believe your ends to be noble and yet you're saving a life, you're also destroying someone's freedoms, and that is not justified in any way, shape, or form. So, when it comes to issues like fetal personhood and other issues like that, I don't favor regulation like that, because it really does put a barrier for access to abortion, which I don't agree with either. Now, me personally, if someone really close to me told me they were going to have one, I would try to talk them out of it, honestly. I don't really care for the procedure that much. I think it's a little barbaric, honestly. But again, not my choice. So, abortion, me and Republicans do not agree. Just wholeheartedly do not agree. Now, when it comes to issues like marriage equality, yeah, the Republicans and I don't agree at all. Unless you're a log cabin Republican, which then we do. But and then on other issues like foreign policy, believe it or not, I agree with Ron Paul on foreign policy, which is a really rare thing for me to admit that I agree with Ron Paul on anything. But with Ron Paul, I do agree with his foreign policy and military views, that the military needs to be defunded to a degree that reduces its role to simply defensive purposes only. We are not the world police. We do not have the right to go into a foreign nation and tell them how to run their affairs unless they are directly threatening world stability. Then perhaps we can get a few more people on besides ourselves to go and address the problem. But for the most part, we don't have the right to go around policing the world, regardless of what history has said about our role in that responsibility. Many people cite World War II. The reason that World War II happened is because we were pacifists. We didn't want to get involved in Europe. But had we gotten involved in Europe in the early on, maybe we would have stopped World War II before many, many more people were exterminated by Hitler and his regime. Now, and so, yeah, and then on top of that, I don't like the military complex, the various contractors and powerful people involved with getting contract. Okay, so, anyway, with contracts, yeah, with people, powerful people getting access to government contracts, people that make weapons and defense technologies and things for biochemical warfare. This needs to stop. We cannot sustain this type of model where we are literally preparing for the next war when there's no next war to be had. We have no rival to us. One could argue maybe China is a rival to us, but they have no interest in military conquest. If you look at Chinese history throughout the last 5,000 years even, the Chinese mindset has always been about protecting what has been historically theirs. And what has been historically theirs is what is now mainland China. They have no interest in moving beyond mainland China. They're not an empire-building civilization, I would argue. So there is no need for the military budget to be sustained at $600+ billion a year. Literally 1/5 of the federal budget is devoted to defense spending. We need to strip 1/3 of that spending off. We need to reduce the number of troops we have across the world. We need to uphold the agreements we've agreed to uphold, such as defending the armistice of North and South Korea. We committed to that, and so we're going to stick to it until both governments ask us to leave and they make peace. But other than that, there's no reason for us to really be anywhere in this world, because there is no Cold War anymore. There is no global threat, except for maybe you could argue terrorism. But again, terrorism is precision strikes. They're not state level powers looking to overthrow us, and they're not threatening as a state. Most of those states are not threatening our interests actively. They're just having, they're engaging in rhetoric that's very inflammatory, yes, but they do not have any real chance of opposing the United States on that level. So military spending needs to be cut drastically, and this goes against the Republican mindset, and in many ways goes against the Democratic mindset as well. They don't support such sharp cuts, but I think that there are a lot more in the Democratic Party that would favor less military, more domestic spending. So, $200 billion a year cut from the military budget and used for domestic spending is definitely something we should look at doing. So, other issues. As far as taxes go, I'm kind of on the fence. I don't know where I would take taxes at. I do want to see a lower income tax rate, but I want to see a lot fewer means of avoiding that tax rate. So, for personal income taxes, I would like to see it set at 20%. I would like to see a threshold established at which that taxation begins. And this is primarily to protect the middle class from unfair amounts of taxation. And so their actual rate of taxes would be drastically lower. But as you grow richer from that threshold, your taxes steadily increase until it normalizes at about 19.9% at the very, very top. And so it's important that we look at all of these issues and try to find policy that balances everybody fairly. And so, a flat tax, I don't believe in using the tax code for the purposes of wealth redistribution. I do not agree with that. It is not the role of the tax code to be a de facto welfare program, which is what the tax code's been turned into for political gain. Tax credits like the child tax credit, the earned income tax credit, the making work paid tax credit, all of these tax credits, they are refundable tax credits, meaning that regardless if they eat up the owed tax, you still get a refund of the remaining credit. And I don't agree with that. And it's not to say that I'm opposed to working families getting help. This is just not the right way to do it. I'd like to see a different system put in place for helping the middle class and the working poor that are going through hard economic times. So again, the tax code is not the appropriate means of doing so. So I don't agree with the use of tax credits, and I don't agree with the use of refundable tax credits especially. Just make it a deduction, make it even across the board. Most of the low income and middle class will not pay hardly any tax actually. What will happen is that would be incentive for them to save money. If they're putting a savings away, they will eventually be able to invest in full-out business ventures, which would be something that we desperately need. So, flat tax 20%. A 20, let's say a $25,000 threshold, $5,000 per child. If you're a couple, then you can combine that into $50,000. But what a couple constitutes is not an issue, because if you're living in the same roof and you want to file together, that's all you need to be. So whatever the law says is beside the point. If you want to file jointly with your roommate even, you can do that. Just as long as you are the only persons on that tax return, and you don't try to put 3 or 4 on the tax return. So anyway. So moving along there, so taxes, I believe you can create a progressive tax with a flat tax mode, so that the maximum rate isn't excessive, but then we're taking into account personal income, which is often very much something that people, they hoard it, they spend it, whatever they do with it, they're going to pay taxes on their excesses. Their excesses are where we should be focusing taxes, not squibbling over this stupid rhetoric that we hear in Washington, which is trying to differentiate. Well, the rich do this, therefore they should have a lower rate, or the poor have this, so they should get a tax break. No, just make the taxes even. Make the amount of income taxed permanent, flat, even, easy. And this is for personal, by the way, not business. Business taxes are a whole different story. I think that taxes should be taxed on the money they have left over, not the money that they earn, not their gross receipts, not their gross earnings. The earnings after they pay all of the earnings after they pay all the bills. So their investors, their employees, their contractors, their costs, their materials, everything. After all of those bills are paid, they should pay tax on whatever's left over. Whatever is going to their shareholders even shouldn't be taxed until it's actually received by the shareholders as income. Once it's received by the shareholder as income, tax it as personal income. Same thing with capital gains. It's personal income, tax it like personal income, 20% across the board. You're going to see a net increase in tax revenue with a decreasing burden of tax revenue across the board. So again, this is where conservatism can work as long as the rules are clear and they're made easy to comply with. Several reports and several research studies have shown that if you make the code simple and easy, you add a little progressive flair to it to protect the middle class from unfair taxation, then you will have a net gain in tax revenue. This is not a myth, ladies and gentlemen, I promise you. So this is something where, when Romney released his tax return and we saw that he had a real tax rate of 15%, I was offended, because he makes an obscene amount of money, and there's no reason why he should not be paying 1/5 of that in taxes. I don't care if he gives to the church. I applaud him for giving to the church, but don't use that as an excuse that, well, I should pay lower taxes. No, you give to the church because you want to give to the church. You believe it. You're right as a successful and blessed person to share your wealth with an organization that will use that money to bring others into your organization and to help those that are less fortunate, which is what a church organization should be doing. It is not something that should be used as a tax deduction, in that it defeats the purpose. Even scripturally, it defeats the purpose. If you're giving just to get the tax deduction, your gift is pointless. It's worthless because you're doing it in exchange for something. It doesn't make any sense. So while many may say, well, you're an anti-church person, no, I'm not an anti-church person. Look at your Bible. Your Bible states how giving is affected by what you do it, what the motive behind it is. If you give to a church because you want a tax break, you're not giving for the right reason, and your gift is pointless in the eyes, in a religious context. Your gift is pointless. So again, when it comes to taxes, I lean more conservative, but I think that there are ideas from both sides of the aisle that can be used to create a very equitable and fair tax code that will drastically increase revenues. So on the next topic, where I will disagree with Republicans hardcore, is regulation of labor and wages. I strongly believe that there needs to be more protections, more legal protections for unskilled workers who have little or no bargaining power to fight for benefits with their employer. So basically, let's take, for example, at-will terminations. I hate at-will termination. I find at-will termination wholly offensive. However, there are reasonable purposes to at-will termination. Don't get me wrong. There is a reason to fire people, such as they do something dangerous, illegal, whatever. Perfectly reasonable to terminate somebody for that reason. But if they're just a little late, if they're they're sick, and that's a big one with me. I'll go into that in a moment. Or if they need to care for a loved one, or maybe they're having family issues at home and they need to be home to deal with it. Or like my mom. My mom was having to care for my father when he was having severe problems with his medication. She had to leave work on numerous occasions to go and care for him. And had she not been an employee of the state of Washington, she would not have had a job. I guarantee it. If she had to keep leaving early like that, and it happened over a period of 4 months several times, she would not have had a job if it had been any other industry or entity that she had worked for. Because not all employers are that generous with their benefit package. In the state of Washington workers, they do make a nice benefits package. Not going to diminish that at all. So, again, important people. So it's very important, people, that we create a fair and equitable labor market that encourages people to work hard and to have some security. That is the key to having a successful workforce, is security. Job security especially. And I'm not talking like making it impossible for employers to fire people, but I am talking about making employers more responsible to fire people, in that employers need to have a clear and present reason for terminating an employee just beyond, well, he looked at me wrong. No, not an acceptable purpose. I'm talking about things like establishing mandatory progressive discipline in a company, meaning you have to be told what you did wrong and you have to be given an opportunity to change that. And if you're not being given that opportunity and you're just being let go for just one mistake, that is unacceptable, ladies and gentlemen. That is absolutely unacceptable. Or if suddenly they just decide someday, well, I just can't afford you, I have to let you go. Again, equally unacceptable to lay off somebody at a moment's notice without any notice whatsoever, when employers are demanding that employees give them notice when they're going to leave. And I'm sorry, it's a double standard constantly. So if a company is going to just let someone go, they need to give notice or they need to pay a stipend. If you're going to let an employee go, you need to give them at least 2 weeks notice, if not 30 days. I prefer 30 days, 2 weeks minimum though. You need to have 14 days notice that you are not going to have a job, and when you're done, and when that term is up, then your job is gone. If they don't give you that notice and they terminate you right away, they need to pay 2 weeks of wages and be done with it, or a month's worth of wages. Whatever that period of time that we decide is acceptable for employees to be given before they're let go. And ladies and gentlemen, I swear to you that while employers may rail against these kinds of ideas, they're like, well, these are unreasonable. It's like, no, they're not unreasonable, because you would expect nothing else if you were an employee and not an employer. So don't give me that crap that it's unreasonable, because you would expect it if you were in their position and you know it. So Other things that I think would be useful for employers to be forced to do: 15 days of unpaid sick leave. And what I mean by that is that if you feel sick, you call your employer, you say, I cannot come in, I am sick, or my kid is sick, or my husband is sick, or my partner is sick, whatever. And that's just the end of it. Period. You have 15 days of leave per year to use for illness. It is protected. You cannot be terminated for it. You cannot be retaliated against for using it. It is your right as an employee to have it. And if you are, let me tell you a story. When I worked for an employer that dealt with old people, being sick was especially a bad thing, because with the elderly, they have weak immune systems. They have sometimes impaired immune systems from whatever disorder, whatever sickness, illness, or disorder they're dealing with. They do not have the means to fight disease, and therefore, if you're sick, you don't come to work. So I got a really bad case of the flu that year, and I was out for 2 weeks. I tried to come back after 1 week, and they sent me home because I was still coughing. I felt fine. I wasn't nauseous. I wasn't throwing up or anything, but I was coughing to such a degree that I could not do the job that I was required to do without scaring the old folks. And a lot of old folks, they're, I hate to say it like this, but a lot of them are hypochondriacs. They don't like being around people who are ill, because they know if they catch something, that could very well be the something they catch that kills them. Pneumonia especially is very prevalent among the elderly, and so if you're coughing, you could easily give them something that would severely impair their livelihood. So after that, I stayed home another week and was prepared to come back to work on a Monday when I got the call that I'm fired. And I told them, but I'm ready to come back to work today. It's like, well, I need the position filled, so we have to let you go. It's like, I understand, but again, you sent me home when I tried to come back to work last time, and it just wouldn't hear anything of it. So, again, and this was after me following all the rules. Got the doctor's note, went to the student health clinic, all of that stuff. So, very unfairly terminated, in my opinion. I understand that they need the position filled, but at the same time, temporary labor is a great thing, ladies and gentlemen. There are markets out there for taking temporary workers and using them when your normal employees can't report to work. And so whether we'd give, like, say, a tax incentive if you have to use labor that's temporary, which costs more because you have to pay a premium to get the quick labor to that job site. I understand that, but it needs to happen in a different way. So, furthermore, other positions that me and Republicans disagree on. I am not a xenophobe. Republicans are xenophobes, and what I mean by that is they are scared of outsiders. They are scared of foreigners, they do not like foreigners, and they respond unfavorably to foreigners on a consistent basis. And I don't know if it's a side effect of being a melting pot society, and by that I mean we have several cultures within our own society, so it really doesn't make any sense. I don't know if it's a result of fearing your own cultural extinction, which is, I think, an underlying concern for the white culture in this nation, is that our white culture is on the decline. We're a part of an outplacement, as they would say. So, and because of all the mixed cultures entering the country through legal or illegal immigration. So again, I don't know why Republicans tend to be xenophobes. They don't like other cultures. They tend to respond very hostilely to other cultures. And what's even weird is it's not even conscious half the time. Ladies and gentlemen, I've dealt with this issue myself. I come from a conservative family, a middle-class family that we don't have the best relations with other cultures. We've had bad experiences with other cultures throughout my life, and so when you realize that perhaps your responses to other cultures are perhaps instinctive because of your history, this is where you have to look at yourself and say, am I responding to this person in a reasonable and fair manner? Is that thought that I am registering from seeing, insert assorted cultural person, a reaction to something that's unreasonable? Is it right to think like that? To react like that? Which sometimes, you can't help not reacting like that out of instinct because you're used to doing it. So you have to literally start deprogramming your reactions to other cultures and learn that they are human beings just like you and me, and they deserve the same level of respect and honor as you would someone of your own culture. So, so me and Republicans, I don't agree with the xenophobic mentality that has somehow gripped the Republican Party, especially in the last 30 years. And it's just not acceptable anymore. It's just not something I can stand dealing with, and I don't like it, and I don't want to be around it at all. So, so my tolerance threshold is somewhat a lot larger than the standard Republican. So we don't agree on that. In regards to states, I do believe in being more cooperative with states, and so and this isn't really a partisan issue per se. I think that Republicans like to favor more state involvement in national issues than less, like Democrats tend to float towards. So I would argue that perhaps states need to be involved in federal programs in a cooperative environment, meaning that we need to invite states legislatures and states governors into the discussion when we talk about issues that directly affect their state. And while we do have representatives for that as well, those representatives and senators that states send to the federal government do not always have a direct input into the process itself. They're not, or let me rephrase that, they're not directly involved in the state's day-to-day affairs because they're in Washington representing the state at the federal level. So this is where we need to be more conscious of the state government's ability and right to be involved in these issues, and I wish that we would invite state legislatures and governors to be more involved on these national issues, because it does directly affect them, and most of the time they have to implement them if it is a shared responsibility program like that of Medicare or the unemployment insurance system. These are all things that states share responsibility for with the federal government, and so we have to make sure that these are being discussed in a meaningful manner. Republicans oppose that because they don't like federal programs. Democrats don't oppose that because they're federalists and they want more federal control over these programs so that they're more equal and fair. So I think that being truly equal and fair, we need to involve the states in these discussions a lot more heavily than we already do. So, all right, ladies and gentlemen, this really does wrap up this segment, but I do want to say thank you for listening, and I encourage you to give me feedback on the stuff that you've listened to. Now, I do have an email account that I'll give to you, and maybe you'll send me some questions, or you can Facebook me, facebook.com/Gabriel Givens. Feel free to message me and express your questions or your point of view on my Facebook page. I will answer any letters I get. And Gabriel is spelled Gabriel, and then Givens is one word. So if you like my show, leave feedback on the YouTube page, and I will also attempt to figure out how to make this a podcast, hopefully, so that I can start using iTunes for its delivery instead of YouTube. But for now, it's just going to go up on YouTube. Thank you so much, and you all have a great night, and you've been great.